Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Pepis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. My guest today is fiction writer Sara Jaffe. Her first novel, Dryland, was published in 2015. Her short fiction and criticism have appeared in the publications including Fence, Bomb, Noon, Matchbook, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. Jaffe co-edited The Art of Touring, an anthology of writing and visual art by musicians drawing on her experiences as a guitarist for the post-punk band Erase Errata. She is also a co-founding editor of the New Herring Press, a Portland-based publisher of prose and polemics. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Mm-hmm.
I should also say that you're currently a visiting assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Oregon.
Yes, I
am. And you will have given a reading at the U of O on November 3rd, 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that. Much of your writing's been in the short story form. What compelled you to write a novel?
I think I had probably just been waiting for the right story to capture my attention enough to be able to become a novel. Dryland actually began as a long short story, and it wasn't really achieving what I wanted it to in that form. And so I sort of got to the crossroads where I thought, okay, do I scrap it or do I try to see if it'll turn into something longer?
So how did the idea for this story about this character come to you?
I think there were a couple different sort of entry points. One was that I was just doing this sort of generative exercise trying to get started on a new project where I was just taking random books off my bookshelf and pointing to a sentence and using that as a jumping off point. And there was something I found in some very random book. I think it was like Mark Twain's autobiography or something. Not the doorstopper one, but like the abridged version. Something made me think about a sibling who was missing or gone. I don't even know if that's explicitly what the line was about. But so I just sort of started writing with that idea in mind. And then I also have been a lifelong mediocre swimmer. I really like swimming, but I'm not good at it, and I don't really have any interest in getting better at it. But I really also, I sort of love the aesthetics of swimming and pools. So I wanted to think about why someone might keep doing something that they weren't good at without hope of really improving.
So given that, can you just give us a quick snapshot of the plot? The overall sense of the story?
So the novel follows a young protagonist named Julie Winter. She's 15 years old. And it's 1992 in an unnamed city in the Pacific Northwest, which is Portland. I'll name it. And she, it's always hard to sort of just talk about the plot just as plot, but essentially she has a brother who is much older brother who's missing or gone. We don't really know where he's gone to. We don't even necessarily know at the beginning whether he's alive or not. But he was a champion swimmer, and she begins swimming at the invitation of an older classmate who she sort of develops a crush on, and sort of maybe swimming for that reason. And it just sort of follows her as she gets into the pool and explores the various relationships in her life.
Would you mind reading a passage?
Yeah, sure. So I'll read from the beginning of the book. On the cover of Swimmer's World was a swimming guy's face obscured by splashes. On Swimming Monthly, a coach in a rose garden. The smell of cigars stuffed the air at Rich's news, and beneath it, a note of stale trading card gum. On the wall, a sign said, "No reading." Rich, if it was Rich, unpacked cigars behind the counter, ignoring me. My monthly or so spot check of swimming magazines consisted of a practiced skimming. Contents, capsules, photos. The cover of Poolside had a blonde diver toweling off. If Rich took my skimming as reading and called me out, it would be easy to say I've been looking for something, and if Rich said, "For what?" Rich wouldn't. Next to me, a guy was working. He was pulling magazines off the rack, tearing off their covers, and throwing the magazines and the covers into two piles on the floor. I'd gotten through Swimming Monthly and had just picked up Poolside. The guy said, "Poolside, right on. You're a swimmer?" I'd never seen him before. One of the things about coming to Rich's was that nobody who knew me went there. Being at Rich's was like being nowhere. I said, I'm not. He said, you look like you could be. I didn't look like anything. My jeans and my raincoat and my flannel and my Henley. I said, I'm not. He said, right on. I said, are you? He laughed. He touched a bead on a cord around his neck. He had skaterish hair, and he was older than me, my brother's age maybe. He said, not me. He said, sorry to interrupt your reading. He smiled like he knew me. I said, I'm not reading. He laughed. He said, that sign's just there for the guys who come in to read porn. He made quotes with his fingers when he said, read. The back wall was all magazines in plastic with their titles popping out above blank sheets of paper. A few men stood in front of them. Should someone who didn't know me be talking to me about pornos? Should he be talking like he knew me and making quotes with his fingers? The men at the back wall shouldn't, it seemed, be doing what they were doing in public, scoping pornos behind plastic, hard-ons squirming in their pants. My finger marked poolside centerfold. The guy was still standing right there, as if he had something else to say to me. I turned the pages as fast as I could, barely looking, defeating my purpose. Goggled eyes, ripped abs, smashed boobs flashed by. Swimmers stroked down lanes and water splashed up and hid their faces. The guy ripped off a cover and tossed it in a pile. Any minute he could ask me what I was looking for. Rich's was only a few blocks up from the river market. It was raining, surprise. 2 rainy days in a row in November meant it wouldn't let up until June. This was the 3rd day. Not that the rain bothered me. Erica showed up and we put up our hoods and walked around the vendors. Neither of us was going to buy anything. Erica wanted to look at the Fimo beads. She looked at a purple and green bead on a brown leather cord and said, I could totally make that. Erica's mom made jewelry that she sometimes sold at the river market. Erica had used her mom's beading stuff to make me a seed bead necklace that was as nice as any for sale in the stalls. The prices at the market had gone up, or the things we liked now were more expensive. The Guatemala backpacks and the ear flap hats. We went because it was what we did, something to do on a Saturday. We got noodles or kettle corn. Erica wanted to go eat our yakisoba by the fountain. I said, it's raining. She said, we'll stand under the awning by the coffee shop. She wanted to watch the skater boys doing tricks on their skateboards by the fountain. There were signs that said no skateboarding, but nobody stopped them. Other skaterish boys and girls stood around smoking. Erica said, don't you love the smell of cloves? A couple of the skaters had brown cigarettes. All I could smell was the tobacco from the regular cigarettes. I said, they smell good. She said, maybe I should start smoking them. I bet they're not as bad for you as regular cigarettes. She said, but I wouldn't know how to buy them. I said, you could ask one of those kids, knowing she wouldn't, or expecting she wouldn't, who knew she might. She was the one who wanted to stand in the rain and watch these kids skate and smoke cloves. It was generous of me to watch them with her. The skaters rode their skateboards up on the cement rim of the fountain. Erica said, do you think that one is cute? I mean hot? I said, the one with the pants? She said, with the purple sweatshirt. His pants were stupid too, but not as stupid as the other ones. Purple sweatshirt kept flicking his hair out of his eyes while he was trying to jump his skateboard up on the rim. Erica said, don't you think it's cute how he keeps flicking his hair? To me, flicking hair wasn't something to call cute or not cute. I said, sure. Erica said, you don't have to think so just because I think so. I said, okay. She said, which one do you think is the cutest? They all looked fine. It really was stupid that skaters had huge pants and hair in front of their faces when they were trying to do something graceful. The guy at Rich's hadn't looked like a skater. He looked like what? A college student? A guitar player? I pointed to one with slightly smaller pants and a black and green flannel and brown hair back in a baseball cap. He was skating around the fountain in circles, smoothly dodging benches and trash and other skaters. Erica said, don't point. She said, he is cute. He looks like a little rascal. You like that type. Whatever that meant. My guy rolled to a stop and stretched his arms. He took off his baseball cap and his long hair went down past his shoulders. It was long, soft-looking hair for a guy. It wasn't a guy. It was suddenly so obviously not a guy. My face felt hot and I wanted to take off my raincoat and my flannel. I didn't move. The girl went and sat down on the bench and took off her flannel, and in her t-shirt you could definitely tell she had boobs. It was embarrassing how much like a girl she looked. The guy with the stupidest pants came over and sat down next to her, close to her, and then leaned in his head and kissed her. They were Frenching, going at it, right there on the bench at the fountain. None of their friends noticed or looked. The guy and the girl were mouthing each other to pieces in the rain. The girl's hand went for the huge crotch of the guy's stupid pants. Erica said, "Whoa." If she said anything to me about how that was the person I picked, I'd be ready for her. I'd blame it on the girl. I'd blame it on the stupid skater clothing. I would say, what was it people said? They should get a room. Erica's guy flicked his hair and took a speeding leap up onto the rim of the fountain and sailed off. Now it was really raining. My dad passed me a drumstick, and my mom took some slices of white meat. My dad asked how the market had been. My mom asked if I bought anything. These were ideas of questions, the sort of paper airplanes of questions my parents felt obligated to lob in my direction over dinner. I could catch them, crumple them, lob them back. I said, "It's gotten too expensive." In my parents' minds, the river market still ran along the river and only sold driftwood and soap. All they could do was take my word for it. I said, "A lot of that stuff I could make myself." I pulled the skin off my drumstick with my teeth. My mind kept veering to the skaters Frenching on the bench, to their sloppy tongues, her hands swatting at his crotch, to how the skater girl had been a boy until she wasn't. My mind went to the instant I saw her boobs through her shirt and realized. It was like the photo at the back of the Elephant Man that I couldn't stop myself from turning to again and again, as if to make sure it was still as horrible, or to make sure that it hadn't gotten more horrible since I'd seen it last. Maybe I was over the river market. Maybe Erica and I only went there because we went there, or I only went there because Erica asked me to go. My mom passed me the cranberries and said, "What about Erica? Did she buy anything?" The jellied cranberry sauce from the can held its shape like a cylinder of Play-Doh. I remembered feeding scoops of Play-Doh into the plastic machine, getting a hold on the plastic lever, and giving it all my strength until something gave and wormy tubes of gray-green spaghetti pushed out the holes. What did my mom care what Erica bought or didn't buy? I said, "I think she bought a bracelet." Pledge came over and put her head in my lap. I felt her skull through her thin, soft fur. When the guy at Rich's had caught me scoping poolside and said I looked like a swimmer, I should have said, "So what?" or "I know," or "Tell me what you mean." When I'd felt the guy's eyes crawling over my shoulders, I should have told him that he had it wrong. My brother was the swimmer in our family. The thing about the photo in the back of the Elephant Man book, which I hadn't checked out of the library in years, was that you needed the photo to complete the story. It wasn't okay to be willing to read about the Elephant Man and not look at him, though for me to look at the photo and think all the same messed up thoughts people had thought when they looked at him in person when he was alive was wrong too, maybe more wrong. Every time I looked at the photo of the Elephant Man or thought about what he looked like in the photo, I wanted to not feel what I was feeling. Nauseated, as if my head were a balloon, as if his skin, if I touched it, would feel like paper mache. If he offered his hand, I would instantly drop it. The skater girl thing was entirely different. She was choosing to look the way she did, and the way she looked didn't seem to be causing her any problems. Anyone who didn't know her and who saw her with those boys in that skating getup would have no reason to think she wasn't one of them. What was getting me was the moment when she went from being a boy fumbling skate tricks to a girl making out on a bench. It wasn't a moment, but a gap between moments, a face with no features. My head felt like a balloon.
Thanks so much for reading it. Mm-hmm. This passage that you read gives a very good sense of this, but your ability to create the subjectivity of this character, this 15-year-old girl, is just incredible. And the more I've thought about the book after finishing it, and about her way of speaking and thinking, mm-hmm. Started to make the title really resonate for me in a lot of rich ways. Can you say a little bit about the title?
Sure. The title took a while for me to come to. It wasn't my working title. I was just, I think, sort of searching through swimming terms, and dryland training is like the exercises that swimmers do out at the pool. Then I liked it for its irony, obviously, I think the fact that Julie is sort of at a distance from her feelings and emotions. She feels dry, perhaps,
mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm.
flat is a word I often use.
Yep. I
think that persists for her throughout the novel.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think is most fascinating about the style is her affect is she's a very low affect, or very restrained in her affect. Mm-hmm. We learn much more about what she feels than the world around her. She's very restrained. Mm-hmm. her style is flat or dry, but it's an amazingly affecting novel. I mean, it's kind of incredible that such a low affect protagonist could generate such an effective response from readers. I think it's really one of the cool things about the book. It's a really cool achievement. Are there particular things about Julie Winter that are appealing for you?
You know, I think, I mean, I want to say first that I'm interested in character, but I'd say above all, I'm most interested in language. So to me, as a character, she's sort of an amalgamation of language and the different sorts of language that sort of can stick to her. You know, that being said, I think that the particular ways in which she protects herself from the world or sort of represses what she feels is interesting to me. The ways in which she lies are interesting to me. You know, I think that those are both of those things, the sort of dialed down emotionality and the lying, are things that are really different from how I am in the world. So for that reason, it was really interesting to create a character who was that way.
Not like you.
Yeah.
How do you see the novel as different from typical coming of age stories?
I do in certain ways. I mean, I think do you mean coming of age stories written for adults? Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, they're sort of like the classical trope of the Bildungsroman is that a character sort of, you know, starts out in the world sort of naive and then goes through some sort of change and becomes socialized into the world at large. I think that there are that brings up lots of questions for me about sort of who has access to the resources to sort of make that kind of change. What are they being socialized into? So I wanted to create a character who didn't really necessarily change, except maybe in very, very small ways, and who, to my mind, is, after the last page of the book, is actually making choices that will get her into not the sort of mainstream of society, but sort of the undercurrents of society, and that's where she's going to find herself.
Yeah, and that's done with such subtlety. It's really interesting. I mean, big things don't happen in this novel,
right?
But I mean, but the things that happen are big. I mean, it's a curious line that you walk. But in typical Bildungsroman, it ends with a marriage or something.
Yeah.
And we're nowhere near that. But you definitely feel that there's this position that she is going to assume is not going to be the conventional position for a protagonist of a Bildungsroman. It's really fascinating. Why'd you choose to write in the first person?
I wanted to feel that the narrative was really solidly lodged in Julie's point of view. But at the same time, I wanted to. I had some issues with the first person. I think that young people, and particularly young people as represented in fiction, are very are sort of all ego, sort of I. But of course, at the same time, as a 15-year-old, she's not fully formed. She doesn't know who she is. She thinks she's one person one day and another person the next. So I wanted to figure out a way to use the first person that would allow me to sort of disrupt that sense of a cohesive subjectivity to some extent. So I sort of, had a couple sort of, I don't want to say tricks, but I had some sort of strategies that I employed to hopefully sort of defamiliarize that first person a little bit.
Yeah, very interesting. What made you want to set it in 1992 and in Portland in 1992?
The time, I mean, she's probably the thing that she has most in common with me is that we are the same age. I was 15 in 1992. But I also, I really didn't want the internet to exist yet. I really was into this idea of her going and looking for her brother in magazines. And so,
That was crucial. And why Portland? I mean, you're from New Jersey, right?
Yeah. I am. I've lived in Portland for 5 years, and I also lived in Portland briefly in the late 90s, so I had a sense of what it was like then. My partner also grew up in Portland, so in part of it was to distance herself from me more. I didn't want to write my own story. And then I just think also the grayness of Portland and the sameness of the days and the sleepiness of Portland, particularly at that time, really suited the mood I was going for.
And I think the title speaks to those things
Sure.
about Portland too.
Yeah.
Music is very important in the novel. The REM song Country Feedback is really important, but then at the end Sonic Youth is important. Why were those things? Why was those musical references and aspects critical?
I think that music is the entry point into subculture and identity for many, many people. But I really didn't. I didn't want her to already have access to that. I think that it seemed more interesting to me to think about the moment right before she gets really into indie music or whatever it may be. And I wanted to use, I wanted it to use real songs that I could really sort of, delve into the descriptions of. And I liked the idea, especially with Country Feedback, of just sort of like exhausting one song, the way that you do listen to a same song over and over again. I didn't want to sort of name drop a lot of band names and stuff into it, but I wanted to have that in the sort of cultural landscape in some way.
Can you tell us about some of your literary influences?
Sure. There are many.
Choose any.
Yeah. I was just thinking, recently I was actually thinking about James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, and I was thinking specifically about his use of the first person and how the scene in the bar right before David first starts speaking to Giovanni, how everyone else sort of knows what's going on before he does, and how that was an interesting way of destabilizing the first person. I'm also a really big fan of Jane Bowles, and I think that this novel is very dissimilar from her work, but the ways in which her characters are all, the ultimate in lack of self-awareness and sort of alienated from themselves, and the way that their psychology sort of feels like their brains are being sort of like turned inside out and facing the world. There's no filter. So I think about her a lot, even if it's not actually reflected on the page.
Interesting. So you, aside from being a fiction writer, you're also the co-founding editor of the New Herring Press, a Portland publisher of chapbooks and prose and polemics. Tell us a bit about your work as an editor and your participation in Portland's cultural community.
Sure. Well, I should say New Herring Press was started with 3 friends in Brooklyn in 2010, and now we all live different places. So it's sort of placeless. We don't necessarily have a place in Portland literary scene, I wouldn't say, but yeah, our goal with the press was to sort of access some of the underground economy of poetry through these small handmade chapbooks, and to put writing into the world that interested and excited us in some way that's kind of stylistically diverse, but all of which just does something to sort of spark our brains.
And if somebody wants to buy some of these chapbooks, what do they need to do?
Probably the best thing is to go to newherringpress.org.
Good.
Yeah.
And do you see yourself as a member, as a participant in the Portland cultural scene?
Yeah, I think increasingly so, especially after putting my book out with Tin House. I've lived as an adult in a lot of different places. I've lived in San Francisco, I've lived in New York, I've lived in Western Massachusetts. So I think I most feel that my literary community is sort of comprised of people from all of those different places. But I do feel that I have a place in Portland, and because Portland is such a small city, it's not just the literary organizations, but it's the arts organizations. It's the Portland Institute of Contemporary Art. I'm doing something with the Northwest Film Center now, so I like having access as a writer to these different arts organizations.
So you're here as a visiting assistant professor in the creative writing program. Tell us about how you approach teaching. What you see your role as a teacher.
You know, more than anything, what I hope that my students come away with in my workshops is a sense of the various possibilities available to them as writers, and sort of the different kinds of choices they can make as writers and the effects that those choices might have. I'm really not interested in teaching a particular way to write as the correct way. Of course, my preferences will come into play, but we read really different kinds of work, and we really talk about the impact of our writing beyond the page. So how it affects each other as readers, how it draws from the world at large, what is our responsibility, who are our responsibilities to as writers. Those are all really important questions for me.
You were, you are also a musician, a guitarist for the post-punk band Erase Errata. Do you see connections between your work as a musician and your work as a writer?
I do. I think, you know, for me, one of the most exciting things about playing music is playing with other people, and writing is so solitary. So in that way, the two are very divergent for me. But I think I'm interested, big picture, in similar things in both. I love a song that sort of has some of the trappings of a pop song, has some hooks, but then also has a whole bunch of noise thrown in there, right? And I like books that sort of look conventional on the surface, but then are doing things to sort of disrupt that. So I think that's probably the biggest way I see the two coming together.
So we have just a minute left. My last question is, are you working on anything new?
I am. I'm working on a collection of stories.
Another collection of stories. You probably don't want to tell us anything about them.
I'll say that if there's a theme, the theme is ambivalence.
The theme is ambivalence, an excellent theme. Well, that's a good that's a good theme to end on. Thank you so much, Sara, for taking the time to talk with us today about your book. It's a great book, Dryland. I'd highly recommend it. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. I've been speaking with fiction writer Sara Jaffe. Her first novel, Dryland, was published in 2015. Jaffe is currently a visiting assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Oregon. She gave a reading at the UO on November 3rd, 2016. Thank you so much for watching.